high above the clouds, aboard the luxurious Prometheus airliner. A deadly dart strikes Madame Giselle, a ruthless moneylender, in mid-flight. In a cabin of strangers, glamorous Lady Horbury, charming Dr. Gale, innocent Jane, gravery ones. A suspect, Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, unravels a web of secrets, debts, and deception. A cunning killer hides behind a stolen uniform, a buzzing wasp, and a poison syringe. In 10 minutes of chaos, one truth emerges: can Poirot's gray cells expose the murderer before they vanish into the skies. Chapter 1. The Flight from Paris. The Prometheus, a silver arrow slicing through the September sky, bore its dozen passengers from Paris to London with the steady drone of its engines. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, sat in seat 9A, his small, neat frame tucked against the window, his sharp eyes missing nothing. His mustache, waxed to perfection, quivered slightly as he surveyed the cabin, a habit born of years spent observing humanity's subtleties. The air was warm, tinged with the faint scent of perfume and cigarette smoke, and the passengers, an eclectic mix, seemed to embody the restless energy of a world between wars. Across the aisle, Lady Cicely Horbury, her auburn hair catching the light, fanned herself with a magazine, her movements theatrical yet strained. Her companion, Venetia Burnaby, a mousy woman with a loyal gaze, hovered attentively, adjusting Lady Horbury's shawl. Poirot noted the actress's nervous fingers, twisting a pearl ring, and the faint tremor in her hand. A woman with secrets, he thought, though secrets were hardly rare in such a confined space. In the row ahead, Dr. Norman Gale, a young dentist with an easy smile, leafed through a dental journal, his polished shoes gleaming. His calm demeanor struck Poirot as almost too deliberate, as if he were playing the part of the unassuming professional. Nearby, Jane Grey, a pretty hairdresser with clear gray eyes, gazed out the window, her modest hat slightly askew. She seemed out of place among the wealthier travelers, yet her quiet composure intrigued Poirot. The Duponts, a French father and son, sat forward, their animated discussion of Mesopotamian artifacts barely audible over the engines. Their scholarly passion was a stark contrast to the brooding figure of Madame Giselle, the notorious Parisian money-lender, who occupied seat to B. Her severe black dress and sharp features gave her the air of a bird of prey, and her solitude suggested she preferred it that way. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, recalling whispers of her ruthless business dealings, loaners to the desperate secured by ruinous terms. Other passengers filled the small cabin. Mr. Clancy, a fidgety writer of detective stories, scribbling notes. Daniel Kerr, a brusque businessman, checking his watch. And James Ryder, a quiet clerk with a pinched face, clutching a briefcase. The stewards, Albert Davis and Elise Grandier, moved efficiently, offering coffee and sandwiches. Davis, a lanky young man with a nervous laugh, fumbled a tray, earning a sharp glance from Elise, whose poised efficiency seemed unshakable. Poirot's attention was drawn to a faint buzzing near Madame Giselle's seat. A wasp, its wings glinting, darted against the window. Several passengers noticed it. Jane Grey flinched. Dr. Gale swatted at it lazily, and Lady Horbury let out a dramatic squeal. Davis hurried over, attempting to trap the insect, but it evaded him. Poirot filed the incident away, his mind attuned to the smallest anomalies. The flight continued, the cabin settling into a restless calm. Poirot declined a drink, preferring to watch the interplay of personalities. Lady Horbury whispered urgently to Venetia, her voice low but tense. Dr. Gale exchanged a polite word with Jane Grey, who blushed faintly. Madame Giselle remained apart, her eyes fixed on a small black notebook, her pen moving with deliberate precision. Then, as the Prometheus began its descent toward Croydon, a sharp cry shattered the hum of the cabin. Elise, the stewardess, stood, frozen near Madame Giselle's seat, her hand at her mouth. The moneylender's head lolled forward, her face gray, her eyes unseeing. A tiny dart, no longer than a matchstick, lay on the floor beside her, its tip glistening with a sinister sheen. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his calm authority cutting through the rising panic. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and commanding, "remain seated. We have a tragedy, a murder, in fact." The passengers gasped, their eyes darting to one another, suspicion already taking root. Poirot knelt beside Giselle, noting the puncture mark on her neck, the faint scent of almonds on her breath. The wasp, still buzzing near the window, seemed an innocent bystander now. The detective's gray cells hummed with questions. Who, in this crowded cabin, had struck so boldly? And how had they escaped the eyes of all? As the plane touched down, Poirot's gaze swept the passengers once more. The truth, he knew, lay hidden in their glances, their gestures, their secrets. The game, as always, had begun. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the Prometheus, now grounded at Croydon Aerodrome, stood silent under a gray September sky, its sleek fuselage a stark contrast to the grim tableau within. Hercule Poirot, his small frame radiating authority, stood near Madame Giselle's lifeless form, his sharp green eyes scanning the cabin with methodical precision. The other passengers, still seated, exchanged furtive glances, their faces a mosaic of shock, fear, and something less definable guilt, perhaps, or merely the unease of being caged in a metal tube with a murderer. The air was heavy with the acrid temps of fear and the faint, lingering scent of Madame Giselle's perfume, now tinged with the metallic undertone of death. Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard clambered aboard, his broad shoulders filling the narrow aisle. His familiar grimace softened slightly at the sight of Poirot, though his tone carried its usual blend of exasperation and respect. "Well, Poirot, you've landed yourself in it again, haven't you? A murder in mid-air, no less. What's the story?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "The story, mon ami, is one of audacity. A woman is dead, struck down by a poisoned dart, in full view of a dozen witnesses, yet none saw the act. It is a puzzle worthy of our attention." He gestured toward Madame Giselle, her body still slumped in seat to be, her severe black dress now a shroud. A tiny puncture mark marred her neck, barely visible against her sallow skin, and on the floor beside her lay the dart, slender, deadly, its tip glistening with a residue that promised answers. Japp knelt beside the body, his practical mind already at work. "Poison, eh? Looks like a nasty business. Any idea what kind?" Poirot shook his head, his gaze fixed on the dart. "Not yet, Inspector, but I suspect something swift and exotic. The method suggests both knowledge and nerve." He pointed to a small wasp, now motionless on the windowsill, its wings glinting in the dim light. "And this, I believe, is a distraction, a clever touch to muddy the waters." Japp grunted, unimpressed by Poirot's theatrics. "A wasp doesn't fire darts, Poirot. Let's get to it, search the lot of them." He signaled to two constables who had followed him aboard, their notebooks at the ready. The passengers, still under Poirot's watchful eye, were instructed to remain seated while their belongings were inspected. The cabin, compact and orderly, became a stage for controlled chaos as the police moved methodically from seat to seat. Poirot, meanwhile, examined the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. The dart, no longer than a matchstick, was crafted, with Carrit's shaft made of lightweight wood, its tip a fine needle. Nearby, stuffed behind seat 3A, a steward discovered a blowpipe, crude but functional, its presence raising a murmur among the passengers. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The blowpipe was too obvious, too conveniently placed. "A misdirection, perhaps," he murmured, his fingers brushing the smooth wood. "The killer wishes us to chase shadows." The search of the passengers' belongings yielded a trove of curiosities, each item a potential clue or a deliberate red herring. Lady Cicely Horbury's handbag contained a silver cigarette case, engraved with her initials, and a small packet of white powder that drew a raised eyebrow from Jap. Cocaine, I'd wager, he muttered, slipping it into an evidence bag. Lady Horbury, her face pale beneath her rouge, protested weakly. It's face powder, Inspector, nothing more. Poirot noted her trembling hands and the way Venetia Burnaby, her companion, hovered protectively. Her own bag yielding only a dog-eared novel and a handkerchief Dr. Norman Gale's dental case, sleek and professional, held an array of tools, probes, and a syringe that caught Poirot's attention. For Novocaine, monsieur? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Gale nodded, his smile disarming. Routine equipment, Mr. Poirot. I never travel without it. The detective's gaze lingered on the syringe, its needle gleaming under the cabin's lights. A possibility, he thought, but one requiring further scrutiny. Jane Grey, the young hairdresser, clutched a small sewing kit, its contents spilling onto her lap as a constable rummaged through her bag. A needle, threaded with blue silk, glinted among her possessions, prompting a nervous laugh from her. I mend on the go, she explained, her gray eyes meeting Poirot's with a mix of defiance and unease. The Dupont's father and son offered Little a notebook filled with sketches of ancient pottery and a pair of spectacles. Their scholarly detachment seemed genuine, but Poirot wondered if it masked something deeper. Mr. Clancy, the writer, fidgeted as his satchel revealed a chaotic jumble of papers, including a half-finished manuscript titled Murder at Midnight. Research, you understand, he stammered, his glasses slipping down his nose. Daniel Kerr, the businessman, surrendered a leather briefcase containing contracts and a gold fountain pen, his impatience palpable. James Ryder, the clerk, clung to his own briefcase, its contents mundane ledger sheets and a pocket diary, but his pinched expression suggested a man with something to hide. The stewards, Albert Davis and Elise Grandier, were searched last. Davis's pockets held only a crumpled timetable and a few coins, while Elise's apron concealed a small mirror, requested by Lady Horbury during the flight. Poirot's mind snagged on this detail. Why a mirror, and why then? The cabin itself was scoured, revealing nothing beyond the blowpipe and a stray hairpin near Giselle's seat. But Poirot's attention returned to Madame Giselle's black notebook, tucked into her handbag, its pages filled with cryptic entries, initials, sums, and dates, a ledger of debts and secrets. This, he said to Jap, holding it up, is the key to her death. She was a woman who traded in trust and betrayal. Jap, flipping through the notebook, frowned. Looks like half of London owed her money. No shortage of motives here. He ordered the body removed to the aerodrome's medical room for examination, and the passengers were escorted to a cramped office for questioning. Poirot lingered in the cabin, his mind tracing the geometry of the crime. The Prometheus was a marvel of modern engineering, its seats arranged in 2 neat rows, yet the murder had unfolded in plain sight. Giselle's position near the aisle had made her vulnerable, but the act itself, delivering a poisoned dart, required precision and daring. The blowpipe, he suspected, was a feint, designed to mislead. But what was the true method? He paced the aisle, reconstructing the flight's final moments. The wasp, buzzing near Giselle's seat, had drawn attention. Lady Horbury's squeal, Jane Grey's flinch, Dr. Gale's casual swat. Albert Davis had fumbled with a tray. Elise had fetched a mirror, and somewhere in that flurry, death had struck. Poirot paused by Giselle's seat, imagining the killer's movements. A blowpipe required a clear line of sight, yet the cabin's bustle made such a shot impossible. A syringe, perhaps, or another subtle tool? The thought tugged at him, but he set it aside, needing more data. Outside, the aerodrome buzzed with activity as reporters gathered, scenting a scandal. Jap, now in the medical room, conferred with Dr. Bryant, the coroner, who confirmed the dart's poison as curaria rare fast-acting toxin that paralyzed the victim's lungs within moments. Nasty stuff, Bryant said, shaking his head. Not something you'd find in a chemist's shop. Poirot, standing nearby, nodded. A poison of intention, Doctor. Our killer is no amateur. Jab turned to Poirot, his notebook open. Right, let's have it. What's your take? Poirot adjusted his tie, his voice measured. The crime inspector is one of calculation. The killer chose a crowded cabin where chaos could shield them. The blowpipe is a distraction, meant to suggest a primitive method, but I suspect something more refined. We must consider who could move freely, unnoticed, and who had access to such a poison. Jap snorted. That's half the passengers, Poirot. Lady Horbury's up to her neck in debt to Giselle motive enough, and that powder in her bag doesn't help her case. Then there's the dentist, with his syringes and cool head. Even the girl, Jane Grey, had a needle in her kit. Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. Patience, mon ami. Motive is but one thread. We must weave the tapestry of opportunity and method. The notebook will guide us. Giselle's secrets are the heart of this. The passengers, now huddled in the aerodrome office, were a study in contrasts. Lady Horbury, her beauty marred by anxiety, chain-smoked, her eyes darting to Venetia, who whispered reassurances. Dr. Gale, leaning against a wall, exuded calm, though his fingers tapped a subtle rhythm on his case. Jane Grey sat quietly, her hands folded, her face betraying a flicker of curiosity. The DuPonts murmured about their delayed excavation, while Clancy scribbled furiously, as if the murder were fodder for his next novel. Kerr and Ryder, the businessman and clerk, kept their distance, their expressions guarded. Poirot, entering the office, observed them all, his mind a whirl of connections. The blowpipe, the dart, the wasp, the notebook, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He approached Elise Grandier, who stood by the door, her dark eyes wary. Mademoiselle, he said softly, during the flight, you fetched a mirror for Lady Horbury. At what moment? Precisement. Elise frowned, recalling. It was just before the cry. She said her makeup had smudged, and I went to the galley for it. Poirot nodded, his mind noting the timing. A distraction, perfectly timed. Albert Davis, hovering nearby, shifted uncomfortably as Poirot turned to him. And you, monsieur, where were you when the wasp caused such a stir? Davis flushed, his Adam's apple bobbing, trying to catch it, sir. It was buzzing about, annoying everyone. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And you saw nothing else? No movement, no gesture out of place. Davis shook his head, too quickly, Poirot thought. Japp, impatient, clapped his hands. Right, we'll start the interviews. Poirot, you sit in. Let's see if your gray cells can sort this lot. The detective nodded, his mind already mapping the cabin's layout, the passengers' positions, the fleeting moments when death had slipped through unnoticed. The blowpipe was a lie, he was certain, but the truth lay close hidden in a glance. A gesture, a secret buried in Giselle's notebook. As the first passenger, Lady Horbury, was called forward, Poirot settled into a chair, his small hands folded, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. The murder on the Prometheus was a challenge to his method, his order, his little gray cells, and Hercule Poirot was not a man to be outwitted. Chapter 3. The Passengers' Secrets. The small office at Croydon Aerodrome, with its peeling wallpaper and single flickering bulb, felt like a stage set for an interrogation. The passengers of the Prometheus, now suspects, sat in a semicircle of mismatched chairs, their faces a gallery of unease. Hercule Poirot, seated beside Inspector Japp, observed them with the keenness of a hawk, his small hands folded neatly in his lap, his mustache a precise line above his lips. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the scratch of Jap's pencil and the occasional cough from a constable standing guard at the door. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, as if the world itself demanded answers for the crime aboard the airliner. Japp, his broad face set in a scowl, opened his notebook with a snap. Right, let's get on with it. One of you lot knows more than you're letting on, and I mean to find out who. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Lady Cicely Horbury, whose elegant fingers clutched a cigarette with a tremor she couldn't quite hide. Poirot, however, remained silent, his green eyes darting from face to face, cataloging every twitch, every averted glance. The truth, he knew, lay not in loud protestations, but in the subtle cracks of human behavior. Lady Horbury and Venetia Burnaby. To be questioned was Lady Horbury, her beauty a touch faded under the harsh light. She rose with theatrical grace, her silk dress rustling, and took the chair opposite Jap. "This is absurd," she began, her voice a practiced drawl. "I barely knew the woman. Yes, I borrowed from her everyone in my circle did, but I paid her back, every penny." Her eyes, wide and indignant, flicked to Poirot, seeking an ally. He inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Jap leaned forward, holding up the black notebook recovered from Madame Giselle's handbag. "This says otherwise, Lady Horbury. Your name's here, with a debt of £2,000, marked unpaid. Care to explain?" Her lips parted, then closed, and a flush crept up her neck. "That's a mistake," she said, her voice less certain. She must have forgotten to update it. Beside her, Venetia Burnaby, her plain face taut with loyalty, nodded vigorously. Cicely settled it months ago. Giselle was notorious for her sloppy records. Poirot's voice, soft but cutting, broke the silence. "And yet, mademoiselle, Madame Giselle's notebook is meticulous, each entry dated and initialed. Why would she err only in your friend's case?" Venetia faltered, her hands twisting her handkerchief. I don't know, but Cicely had no reason to harm her." Poirot's eyes lingered on Venetia's nervous fingers, then returned to Lady Horbury. "During the flight, Madame, you requested a mirror from the stewardess. A curious moment to concern oneself with appearance. Nan." Lady Horbury laughed, a brittle sound. "A woman's vanity, Mr. Poirot. Surely you understand." But her eyes darted to Venetia, and Poirot noted the unspoken signal between them. Jap, impatient, waved her back to her seat, muttering about society types and their evasions. Poirot, however, filed away the exchange, the mirror, the debt, Venetia's fierce protectiveness. There was a thread here, delicate but significant. Dr. Norman Gale. Next came Dr. Norman Gale, the young dentist, whose easy charm seemed undimmed by the grim circumstances. He settled into the chair with a relaxed air, his dark hair neatly combed, his smile just shy of a grin. "I'm afraid I'm not much help, Inspector," he said, his voice smooth. "I was reading a journal during the flight dental research. You know, I noticed the wasp, swatted at it, but that's all." Jap, unimpressed, held up the syringe from Gale's dental case. "This could deliver poison, couldn't it? Curare, maybe." Gale's smile didn't fall. "Theoretically, yes. But my syringe holds Novocaine, not exotic toxins. I'm a dentist, not a chemist." Poirot tilted his head, his tone deceptively mild. "And yet, Monsieur Curare is not unknown in medical circles. A man of your profession might know where to obtain it." Gale's eyes met Poirot's steady and unblinking. "I suppose so, but I don't. My work is in Harley Street, not some jungle pharmacy." Poirot noted the man's composure, too polished, perhaps, for innocence. "You were seated near Madame Giselle, Nan. Did you observe her during the flight?" Gale shrugged. "She seemed quiet, absorbed in her notebook. I didn't think much of it until the scream." His voice held just the right note of regret, but Poirot's instincts prickled. Gale's answers were too neat, his manner too rehearsed. As the dentist returned to his seat, Poirot's mind lingered on the syringe, a tool of precision, like the crime itself. Jane Grey, the hairdresser, approached with a mix of nervousness and defiance, her gray eyes, clear and direct. Met Japp's scowl without flinching. "I don't know anything about murders," she said bluntly, "but I'll tell you what I saw." She described the flight, the wasp buzzing near her seat, Lady Horbury's fuss, the steward's clumsy attempt to catch it. "I was near Madame Giselle," she admitted, "but I didn't see anything odd, not until Elise screamed." Japp tapped his pencil. "Your sewing kit had a needle, Miss Grey, sharp enough to deliver a dart." Jane's cheeks flushed. "It's for mending, not murder. I'm a hairdresser, not a poisoner." Poirot smiled faintly, charmed by her candor. "Mademoiselle, you are observant. Did you notice anyone near Madame Giselle's seat? Perhaps during the commotion with the wasp?" Jane frowned, thinking, "Not really. Rupert, the steward Albert, was fetching drinks, and I saw him wave at the wasp. But that's all. Everyone was distracted." Poirot nodded, his mind turning. Distraction, he thought, the wasp, the mirror, the flurry of activity. "And you, mademoiselle, did you know Madame Giselle?" Jane shook her head firmly. "Never heard of her until today. I was just on holiday in Paris, that's all." Her honesty was refreshing, but Poirot wondered if her simplicity concealed a deeper motive. A young woman, alone, might have secrets. Still, he sensed no guile in her, only a quiet strength. He let her go, his thoughts already shifting. The Duponts, Jean and Armand, were a study in contrast. Jean, the father, gray-haired and scholarly, his son Armand, eager and intense. Their interview was brief, their answers clipped. Whodunit were in Egypt, discussing their work on an excavation in Alexandria. "We were delayed," Jean said curtly. "Our flight was from Paris to London, nothing more." Armand echoed his father, his focus on a notebook of archaeological sketches. Poirot probed gently. "Messieurs, you are men of science, yes. Did you know Madame Giselle?" Both denied any connection. Their alibi, their shared passion for antiquities. Poirot's question lingered in Jean's mind. "You suspect, perhaps, a professional interest in poisons?" Jean's eyebrows rose. "Poisons? No, monsieur. Our work is with artifacts, not chemicals." Poirot's gaze shifted to Armand. "And you, young monsieur, noticed anything unusual on the flight?" Armand shook his head. "Only the wasp, monsieur. It caused a stir, but I was sketching at the time." Their detachment intrigued Poirot. Were they truly so absorbed, or was their disinterest a mask? He made a mental note to investigate their recent travels. The remaining passengers, the interviews of the remaining passengers, Mr. Clancy, Daniel Kerr, and James Ryder, yielded less. Clancy, the writer, rambled about his novel's plot, claiming inspiration, but no connection to Giselle. Kerr, the businessman, was brusque, denying any debt to the moneylender, his contracts clean. Ryder, the clerk, fidgeted, his diary revealing only mundane appointments, but his nervous demeanor caught Poirot's eye. Each passenger's story held gaps, but none as clear as the others. Poirot's observations as the interviews concluded. Poirot stood, his mind a whirl of details. The blowpipe, a clumsy tool, seemed a deliberate misdirection, its discovery too convenient. The wasp, the mirror, the syringal, pointed to a killer who thrived on chaos, blending into the cabin's bustle. Lady Horbury's debt was a strong motive, but her flamboyance felt too obvious. Gale's calm was unnerving, his syringe a perfect tool. Jane's candor was disarming, yet her proximity to Giselle raised questions. The Duponts' scholarly air seemed genuine, but their detachment was too perfect. Clancy's eccentricity, Kerr's impatience, Ryder's nerves each held a secret, but whose was deadly? Poirot requested the passenger list and seating chart from Jap, his gray cells humming. "The killer, Inspector," he said, "is one who hides in plain sight. We must look beyond the obvious into the heart of order." Jap grunted, skeptical, but trusting. The notebook, the dart, the uniform prose, mind wove them together. Sensing the truth lay in the fleeting moments of distraction, waiting to be unraveled. Chapter 4. The Dart and the Wasfa Laboratory at Scotland Yard. A sterile chamber of glass and steel, hummed with the quiet efficiency of science. Hercule Poirot stood beside a long table, his gloved hands hovering over the slender dart that had ended Madame Giselle's life. Its delicate craftsmanship lit wood, a needle-sharp tip spoke of intention, not impulse. Inspector Jap, pacing nearby, muttered about the press swarming outside, their headlines already screaming of the airliner assassination. Poirot, however, was oblivious to the clamor. His green eyes fixed on the dart, its glistening residue a silent witness to murder. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the forensic chemist, adjusted her spectacles and delivered her findings with crisp precision. "Curare," she said, gesturing to a microscope slide. "South American, rare in England. It paralyzes the respiratory system within seconds. Whoever used this knew exactly what they were doing." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. "A poison of choice, madame, for one who seeks silence and speed. But how was it delivered?" His gaze shifted to the blowpipe, now resting on a sterile cloth. Its rough-hewn surface at odds with the dart's elegance. Jap snorted, picking up the blowpipe. "This thing's the key, Poirot." Some blighter puffed the dart right at her, bold as brass. Poirot's smile was faint, almost pitying. "Non, mon ami. The blowpipe is just a stage prop, meant to mislead. In a crowded cabin, with all eyes darting about, such a tool would be seen. No, the method was subtler, the killer more cunning." Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, her attention returning to her notes. Poirot's mind turned to the wasp, that small, buzzing distraction found dead on the Prometheus's windowsill. He requested it be brought from evidence, and a constable delivered it in a glass vial. Its fragile wings, still faintly iridescent, seemed innocuous, yet Poirot saw its role clearly. "This creature," he said, holding the vial to the light, "was released to create chaos, a moment of confusion to mask the true act. But how was it introduced, and by whom?" Jap, impatient, gestured to a stack of passenger statements. "We've got plenty to work with, Poirot. Lady Horbury's up to her ears in debt, and that powder in her bag cocaine. Carter's confirmed it gives her a motive to stay out of Giselle's bad books. Then there's Gale, with his syringes. Curare's medical, isn't it? He's got the know-how." Poirot inclined his head, conceding the point, but not the conclusion. "Motive and means, yes, but opportunity, Inspector. We must reconstruct the moment of death." Leaving the laboratory, Poirot and Jap returned to the aerodrome, where the Prometheus remained under guard. The cabin, now empty, felt like a stage after the curtain's fall, its seats silent witnesses to the drama. Poirot paced the aisle, his small feet precise, his mind mapping the layout. Madame Giselle's seat, to be, was near the aisle, exposed. Two passing eyes, yet shielded by the flurry of activity during the flight's final half-hour. He closed his eyes, picturing the scene. Albert Davis serving drinks, Elise fetching a mirror, the wasp buzzing. Passengers shifting Lady Horbury's squeal, Jane Grey's flinch. Dr. Gale's casual swat. Opening his eyes, Poirot knelt by seat. To be, examining the floor. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, caught his attention, a trace of shoe polish, perhaps, or something else. He beckoned a constable to collect it, his mind racing. The blowpipe, found behind seat 3A, was too far from Giselle to be used directly, yet its presence suggested intent. "The killer," he murmured, "wished us to believe in a primitive act, but the truth is modern, precise, like a surgeon's hand. Back at Scotland Yard, Poirot requested a detailed timeline of the flight, cross-referencing passenger statements with the steward's logs. The murder, Dr. Carter estimated, occurred between 11:45 and 11:55 a.m. during the drink service. Albert Davis had served coffee, moving from the front of the cabin to the rear, while Elise attended to Lady Horbury's mirror request. The Wasp, noted by multiple passengers, had appeared around 11:50, its buzzing drawing attention just before. Elise's scream alerted the cabin to Giselle's death. Poirot spread the seating chart on a table, his finger tracing each passenger's position. Lady Horbury in 4A had a clear view of Giselle, but was distracted by her mirror. Dr. Gale, in 3B, was close enough to act, his dental case at hand. Jane Grey, in 2A, sat beside Giselle, her sewing kit a potential tool. The DuPonts, in 5A and 5B, were immersed in their sketches, their focus seemingly elsewhere. Clancy, Kerr, and Ryder, scattered across the cabin, claimed ignorance, but their proximity, varied. Ryder, in 1B, was closest to the galley, where the blowpipe was found. The blowpipe puzzled Poirot. Its length nearly a foot made it unwieldy. In a confined space. To use it, the killer would need a clear line of sight and a moment of privacy, neither of which the bustling cabin offered. He considered alternatives. A syringe, like Dr. Gale's, could deliver curare with a quick jab, disguised as a casual brush or a steward's service. But Gale had been seated, his movements noted by Jane Grey. Poirot's thoughts turned to the steward's Albert Davis's clumsy pursuit of the Wasp. Elise's absence to fetch the mirror, a gap in their presence, brief but critical, opened possibilities. Jap, reviewing the evidence, leaned toward Lady Horbury. She's got the motive, Poirot. Giselle was squeezing her dry, and that cocaine habit's a ticking bomb. She could have slipped something to Giselle during the commotion. Poirot shook his head. Her actions are too loud, Inspector. The killer is one who whispers, not shouts. We must consider the Wasp. How did it enter a sealed cabin? A vial, perhaps, released by a passenger or steward. To test his theory, Poirot visited the airline's maintenance chief, Mr. Harold Blake, at the aerodrome. Blake, a wiry man with grease-stained hands, confirmed the Prometheus's windows were sealed, its ventilation filtered. No Wasp could have got in naturally, he said, scratching his head. Must have been brought aboard. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A deliberate act, then a tiny accomplice to the murder. He requested a list of items checked in the cabins. Cleaning records. A small glass vial, overlooked in the initial search, was noted as found under seat 1A, near Daniel Kerr. Poirot's pulse quickened a clue. But whose? Returning to Scotland Yard, Poirot examined Madame Giselle's notebook again. Its cryptic entries initials, like CHNG, JR, matched passengers' names, but others were less clear. CH, Lady Hor 2000, as Jap had noted, but NG showed a smaller debt, £500, marked as recent. Dr. Gale, perhaps. Poirot's mind raced. A dentist, accustomed to precision, with access to medical supplies, could procure curare, yet Gale's charm and calm suggested a man confident in his innocence or his deception. Poirot met Jap in the evidence room, where the passengers' belongings were catalogued. Lady Horbury's cigarette case, Gale's syringe, Jane's needle, the DuPont sketches. Each item told a story, but none screamed guilt. The blowpipe, however, nagged at Poirot. Its placement behind seat 3A, near Gale, was too convenient, yet its impracticality as a weapon intrigued him. The killer, he told Jap, wants us to chase this relic of the jungle. But the truth lies in civilization, in a tool, small, silent, and precise. Jap, frustrated, threw up his hands. You're talking in riddles, Poirot. Give me a name. Poirot's smile was serene. Not yet, mon ami. The truth requires order. and we have only begun to arrange the pieces. The wasp, the vial, the notebook, these are our guides. Let us follow them." He turned to the seating chart, his finger resting on seat to be, where Madame Giselle had met her end. The puzzle was complex, but Hercule Poirot thrived on complexity. The killer, he knew, was among them, their secret hidden in the fleeting moments of a flight, now grounded in history. Chapter 5. The Steward's Tale. The Croydon Aerodrome's administrative office. A cramped room smelling of ink and stale coffee, buzzed with the low hum of tension. Hercule Poirot sat at a scarred wooden table, his small frame dwarfed by the hulking presence of Inspector Japp, who flipped through his notebook with a scowl. The passengers had been released to a nearby lounge under police supervision, their murmurs filtering through the thin walls like the drone of distant bees. Outside, rain lashed the windows, mirroring the storm brewing in Poirot's mind. The murder of Madame Giselle, struck down by a poisoned dart in the Prometheus's cabin, demanded answers, and Poirot's gray cells were alight with the challenge. Today, the focus was on the stewards, Albert Davis and Elise Grandier. Movements during the flight offered a window into the crime's mechanics. Poirot, his hands folded neatly, fixed his gaze on Albert Davis, who stood before them, shifting from foot to foot. The young steward, barely 25, had a boyish face marred by a nervous flush, his sandy hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "I don't know what else I can tell you, sir," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It was a normal flight until it wasn't." Japp leaned forward, his tone gruff. "Normal, eh? A woman's dead, and you didn't see a thing. You were serving drinks, bustling about. How'd you miss a murder?" Davis's Adam's apple bobbed. "I was busy, Inspector. Coffee, tea, passengers asking for this and that. Then there was that blasted wasp, buzzing around, making everyone jumpy." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of unease in Davis's gaze. "The wasp, monsieur," he said softly. "Tell me precisely what you did when it appeared." Davis swallowed, his fingers tugging at his uniform's cuff. "It was near the end of the drink service, about 1:15. Lady Horbury squealed, said it was near her face. I tried to swat it with a napkin, but it kept darting about. I chased it toward the back, near Madame Giselle's seat, but I didn't see anything odd. Next thing I knew, Elise was screaming, and, well, you know the rest." Poirot's mustache twitched, his mind snagging on a detail. "You chased the wasp, monsieur, and then, did you leave the cabin at any point?" Davis hesitated, his eyes darting to Japp, then back to Poirot. "Well, yes, sir. I ran out of coffee, so I popped to the galley to fetch more. Took maybe a minute, no more." Poirot leaned forward, his voice like silk. "A minute, monsieur, is an eternity in a murder. Who was in the galley with you?" Davis blinked, flustered. "No one, sir. Elise was in the cabin, dealing with Lady Horbury's request for a mirror. I was alone." Poirot's gaze held steady, noting the sweat beading on Davis's brow. A minute alone, a gap in the cabin's watchful eyes enough, time for a swift, deadly act. He made a mental note, his thoughts turning to the galley's contents. And the galley, monsieur, it contained nothing unusual. No vials, no tools out of place. Davis shook his head, too quickly, Poirot thought. Just the usual cups, trays, coffee urns. Nothing else. Japp, growing impatient, waved him off. "Right, you're done for now, lad. But don't leave the aerodrome." As Davis shuffled out, Poirot's mind lingered on his nervous demeanor. A young man easily overlooked, moving freely in the cabin. Could he be more than a bystander? Next came Elise Grandier, the stewardess, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath her cap, her posture rigid with professionalism. Unlike Davis, she met Japp's glare with composure, though her hands clasped tightly betrayed a hint of strain. "Mademoiselle Poirot began, his tone gentle. You were most attentive during the flight. Tell me of this mirror you fetched for Lady Horbury." Elise's lips tightened briefly, as if recalling in irritation. She asked for it just before the incident. Said her makeup was smudged. I went to the galley to get it, as we keep a small one there for passengers. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and this was when, precisement, Elise thought for a moment. Around 10 minutes to noon, I'd say. I was back in the cabin just as Albert was chasing the wasp. Then I saw Madame Giselle. Her head was slumped, and I checked her pulse. Her voice faltered, her composure cracking. She was already gone. Poirot nodded, his mind aligning her timeline with Davis's. The mirror, the wasp, the coffee runa, cascade of distractions. Perfectly timed. JAPP tapped his pencil, his patience thinning. "You didn't see anyone near Giselle? No one acting odd?" Elise shook her head. "It was hectic, Inspector. The wasp had everyone on edge. Lady Horbury was fussing. Miss Gray flinched. Dr. Gale swatted at it. I didn't notice anything else until it was too late." Poirot tilted his head, his voice probing. "And Madame Giselle herself, Mademoiselle. Did she speak?" Gesture seemed distressed before her death. Elise frowned, recalling. "She was quiet, writing in that notebook of hers. I offered her a drink, but she waved me off. She seemed preoccupied, but not afraid." Poirot's mind seized on this Giselle, absorbed in her secrets, unaware of the shadow closing in. He thanked Elise, his thoughts swirling. The stewards. Stories aligned, yet gaps remained. Davis's minute in the galley, Elise's absence for the mirror. Small windows, but enough for a killer to slip through. Poirot requested access to the galley, and Jap, grumbling, accompanied him to the Prometheus. The galley, a narrow space at the rear of the cabin, was a model of efficiency. Trays stacked neatly. Coffee urns secured, a small mirror tucked in, a drawer. Poirot's eyes scanned every surface, searching for anomalies. A faint scratch on the counter caught his attention, barely visible, as if a sharp object had grazed it. "Curio," he murmured, beckoning a constable to photograph it. Could it be the mark of a syringe, a dart, or something else? He requested a thorough sweep of the galley's contents, suspecting the killer had used its anonymity to their advantage. Back at Scotland Yard, Jap spread out the evidence on a table. The dart, the blowpipe, Giselle's notebook, the vial from under seat 1. Poirot picked up the notebook. Its pages a cipher of debts and desperation. CH Lady Horbury owed £2,000. Her name, underlined with a flourish. NG Dr. Gale, perhaps. Showed £500, recent and unpaid. Other initials hinted at passengers or strangers, their stories locked in Giselle's cryptic code. "This book," Poirot said, "is a map of motives. But the killer is not merely one who owed money, they are one who feared exposure." Jap, rubbing his chin, pointed to the blowpipe. "What about this then? You keep saying it's a red herring, but it was there, plain as day." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Precisement, Inspector. It is too plain, too clumsy for a crime so refined. The killer placed it to mislead us, to suggest a savage act. But curare is not savage, it is surgical." His thoughts returned to Dr. Gale's syringe, its needle a perfect match for the dart's precision. Yet Gale had been seated, his movements noted. Could he have acted unseen, or was another hand at work? Poirot's mind turned to the steward's roles. Davis's absence, brief but critical, opened a window of opportunity. Elise's mirror, errant, timed to coincide with the wasp's appearance, suggested orchestration. Had one of them been complicit, or were they pawns in a larger game? He requested their personnel files from the airline, seeking any hint of a connection to Giselle. Davis, a recent hire, had a clean record but a history of gambling debts small, but enough to raise Poirot's eyebrow. Elise, a veteran stewardess, showed no such flaws, her life a model of order, yet her composure, so like Gale's, felt too perfect. Jap, growing restless, pushed for action. We've got Lady Horbury's debt, Gale's syringe, and now Davis with his gambling problem. Let's bring them in for a proper grilling. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm. Patience, mon ami. The truth is like a fine wine, it must. Breathe. We have the dart, the wasp, the notebook, and now these moments of absence. Let us examine the galley's contents, the steward's pasts, and the passengers' secrets. The killer hides among them, their masks still intact. As they left the office, Poirot's thoughts churned. The crime was a tapestry of distractions. The wasp, the mirror, the blowpipe woven to conceal a single, precise act. The stewards, moving freely, were ideally placed to strike, yet their innocence seemed plausible. Or was it? Poirot's gray cells hummed, piecing together the puzzle. The truth, he knew, lay in the shadows of those fleeting minutes, waiting for his meticulous mind to bring it into the light. Chapter 6. Shadows of Motive. The London air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement as Hercule Poirot stepped out of a taxi in Mayfair. The elegant facade of Lady Cicely Horbury's flat loomed before him, its Georgian windows glinting like watchful eyes. Inside, the drawing-room was a stage of opulent silk drapes, a crystal chandelier, and a faint haze of cigarette smoke. Lady Horbury reclined on a chaise longue, her beauty marred by a nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth. Beside her, Venetia Burnaby sat stiffly, her plain features taut with vigilance. Poirot, his bowler hat in hand, bowed slightly, his eyes missing nothing. Mademoiselle, he began, his voice smooth as velvet. I come to clarify certain matters concerning the tragedy aboard the Prometheus. Lady Horbury's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. Clarify? You mean accuse, Mr. Poirot? I've told the police everything. I owed Giselle money. Yes, but I paid her. This is harassment. Her hand trembled as she lit another cigarette, the flame casting shadows across her face. Poirot's smile was disarming. Madame, I seek only the truth. Your debt, as recorded in Madame Giselle's notebook, was substantial £2,000, unpaid. Yet you claim it settled. Perhaps you can enlighten me. Lady Horbury's eyes flicked to Venetia, who leaned forward, her voice steady but strained. It's as Cicely said. She paid Giselle months ago, in cash. That woman's records were a mess. She preyed on people, you know? Poirot's gaze lingered on Venetia's clenched fists, noting the ferocity of her loyalty. And you, mademoiselle, were you also a client of Madame Giselle? Venetia flushed, her eyes narrowing. No, never. I'm not one for debts. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her defensiveness. Lady Horbury's cocaine habit, confirmed by Inspector Japp's tests, suggested desperation, and Giselle's threats to expose her could have pushed her to extremes. Yet Venetia's presence, like a shadow, intrigued him. Was she merely a friend, or a guardian of deeper secrets? He probed gently, asking about the flight, the mirror, the wasp, the moment of Giselle's death, but their answers were vague, rehearsed, offering nothing new. As he left, Poirot felt the weight of their unease, a thread to tug later. His next visit was to Dr. Norman Gale's dental practice in Harley Street, a modest office with gleaming instruments and the faint scent of antiseptic. Gale greeted him with a warm handshake, his charm as polished as his tools. Mr. Poirot, I'm flattered by the attention, but I'm just a dentist, not a master criminal. His laugh was easy, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught the slight tightening of his jaw. Monsieur Poirot said, settling into a chair, your syringe, found on the Prometheus, is most interesting. Curare, I am told, is not unknown in medical circles. Have you encountered it? Gale's smile held firm. Curare only in textbooks, I'm afraid. My work is fillings and extractions, not exotic poisons. He gestured to his shelves, lined with dental journals. I heard of Giselle through a patient, a society lady, who mentioned her loans, but I never dealt with her myself. Poirot's gaze drifted to a locked cabinet behind Gale, its key dangling from his pocket. In your debt, monsieur? Madame Giselle's notebook lists NG with £500 owed. A coincidence, perhaps. Gale's eyes flickered, but he recovered quickly. Common initials, Mr. Poirot. I'm not the borrowing type. His tone was light, but Poirot sensed a crack in his composure. He pressed further, asking about the flight Gale swat at the Wasp. His proximity to Giselle, but the dentist's answers were smooth, almost too perfect. As Poirot left, he noted the cabinet again, resolving to have Japp search it. Gale. Calm was a mask, he suspected, hiding either innocence or calculation. Jane Grey's salon, a cheerful nook in Bloomsbury, offered a stark contrast to the day's earlier visits. The young hairdresser greeted Poirot with a shy smile, her gray eyes bright with curiosity. I never thought I'd be mixed up in a murder, she said, setting aside a pair of scissors. It's like something from one of Mr. Clancy's novels. Poirot chuckled, charmed by her frankness. Mademoiselle, you were seated beside Madame Giselle. Did you notice her mood, her actions, before the tragedy? Jane frowned, her hands smoothing her apron. She was quiet, scribbling in that notebook. I offered to share my magazine, but she barely looked up. Then the Wasp came, and everything went topsy-turvy. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft. And you, mademoiselle, saw nothing else. No movement, no hand near her seat. Jane shook her head, her expression earnest. I wish I had. It was all so quick. Lady Horbury's fuss, the steward chasing the Wasp, Dr. Gale swatting it. I was too busy ducking to notice much else. Poirot studied her, sensing no deception. Her sewing kit, with its needle, had been dismissed by Japp as irrelevant. But Poirot wondered if her proximity to Giselle made her a witness or a suspect. You are observant, mademoiselle, he said. If anything comes to mind, you will tell Poirot. Oui. Jane nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. As he left, he felt a pang of fondness. She was an innocent, he thought, but innocence could be a blind spot. Back at Scotland Yard, Poirot met Japp in a cluttered office, the table strewn with evidence bags. The black notebook lay open, its pages a labyrinth of initials and sums. Japp, nursing a cup of tea, pointed to a new report. Giselle's bank records came through. Lady Horbury's payments stopped 6 months ago, despite her claims. And Gale. A withdrawal of £500 last month. No clear recipient. Smells fishy to me. Poirot nodded, his mind weaving connections. The motives, mon ami, are many, but the method is singular. We must focus on the moment of death, the Wasp, the mirror, the steward's absence. Japp grunted, flippant, to another report. Davis, the steward, has a history of gambling debt small, but enough to make him desperate. Giselle could have had him in her pocket. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And Elise, the stewardess, her record is clean, yet her composure is formidable. We must consider if one of them, or both, played a role. He requested a deeper check on their backgrounds. Suspecting a link to Giselle's web of clients, Poirot's thoughts returned to the galley's scratch mark. The vile underseat 1A, the blowpipe's clumsy presence. The killer had orchestrated a symphony of distractions, he realized, each note designed to obscure the fatal act. Lady Horbury's debt and addiction made her a prime suspect, but her flamboyance was too obvious. Gale's syringe and calm demeanor pointed to expertise, yet his proximity was limited. Jane's innocence seemed genuine, but her seat beside Giselle was too convenient. The DuPonts, Clancy, Kerr, and Ryder lingered in the background. Their motives less clear but not absent. As evening fell, Poirot stood by the office window, watching the rain blur the city's lights. The killer, he told Japp, is one who thrives in shadows. using the chaos of the moment to strike. The notebook reveals their fear, but the method reveals their mind. Japp sighed, tossing his pencil down. You're too cryptic, Poirot. Give me a name, or at least a plan. Poirot's smile was serene. The plan, mon ami, is to follow the shadows to the galley, the vial, the secrets unspoken. The truth is near, if we but look with clarity. Chapter 7. The timing puzzle. The Scotland Yard office, bathed in the dim glow of a single desk lamp, felt like a cocoon of concentration as Hercule Poirot pored over the Prometheus's flight timeline. The room was cluttered with evidence bags, passenger statements, and the ever-present black notebook of Madame Giselle, its cryptic entries, a silent taunt. Inspector Japp, his tie loosened and his face etched with fatigue, slumped in a chair, nursing a cold cup of tea. Outside, the London night pressed against the windows, its darkness a mirror to the mystery at hand. The murder of the moneylender, struck down by a Ferrari-tipped dart in a crowded airliner, demanded precision, and Poirot's gray cells were alight with the challenge of unraveling its intricate mechanics. Poirot spread the seating chart and steward logs across the table, his small hands moving with deliberate care. The key, mon ami, he said, his voice a low murmur, is in the timing. The murder occurred between 11:45 and 11:55 a.m., a mere 10 minutes, when chaos reigned in the cabin. We must reconstruct those moments with exactitude, Japp grunted, rubbing his eyes. 10 minutes of madness, Poirot, a wasp buzzing, passengers fussing, stewards running about. How do you pin a murder to that? Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. By seeking order in the chaos. Inspector, let us begin. He traced the timeline, cross-referencing the steward's accounts with passenger statements. Albert Davis, the young steward, had begun the drink service at 11:40, moving from the front of the cabin to the rear, serving coffee and tea. At 11:45, Lady Cicely Horbury requested a mirror, sending Elise Grandier to the galley. Around 11:50, the wasp appeared, sparking a flurry. Lady Horbury's squeal, Jane Grey's flinch, Dr. Norman Gale's casual swat. Davis, chasing the wasp, briefly left for the galley at 11:52 to fetch more coffee. By 11:55, Elise's scream alerted the cabin to Giselle's death. Poirot's finger paused on the chart, marking seat to be, where Giselle had sat. The dart, he said, struck her neck, a precise act requiring a clear moment. Yet the cabin was alive with movement ties everywhere, yet none saw the deed. He leaned back, his green eyes narrowing. The blowpipe found behind seat 3A remained a puzzle. Its use in a crowded cabin was implausible, too conspicuous, too awkward. The blowpipe is a lie, he murmured, a prop to mislead us. The true method was silent, invisible. Japp, stirring, pointed to Dr. Gale's statement. That dentist's syringe keeps nagging at me. Curare could be injected, couldn't it? He was close enough, in 3B. Poirot nodded, his mind revisiting Gale's polished demeanor, the locked cabinet in his office. The syringe is a possibility, but Gale was seated, watched by Jane Grey in 2A. To act unnoticed, he would need a distraction and the wasp provided it. He paused, considering another angle. Or perhaps the stewards, moving freely, held the key. Poirot requested the galley's inventory report, delivered that afternoon by the airline. The scratch mark on the counter, photographed at his insistence, suggested a sharp toolless syringe, perhaps, or a dart's tip. The glass vial, found under seat 1A, near Daniel Kerr, was another thread. Analyzed by Dr. Carter, it showed traces of sugar syrup, likely used to lure the wasp before its release. A deliberate act, Poirot said, holding the vial's report. Someone brought this wasp aboard, knowing it would sow confusion. Japp's eyes lit up. Kerr, then, he, was in 1A, right by the vial. Maybe he's not as clean as he seems. Poirot shook his head, his expression thoughtful. Monsieur Kerr is a businessman, brusque, but not subtle. The vial could be a plant, meant to implicate him. We must consider who had access to the galley. His thoughts returned to Albert Davis's minute long absence, Elise's errand for the mirror. Either could have released the wasp, prepared the dart, or both. To test his theory, Poirot proposed a reconstruction. Jap, grumbling but intrigued, arranged for the passengers and stewards to return to the Prometheus the next morning, under police supervision. The cabin, still cordoned off, was a perfect stage to reenact the fatal 10 minutes. At dawn, the group assembled, their faces a mix of reluctance and curiosity. Lady Horbury, draped in furs, complained loudly. Dr. Gale maintained his easy charm. Jane Grey looked pale, but resolute. The DuPonts, father and son, stood apart, their scholarly detachment unshaken. Clancy, Kerr, and Ryder shuffled uncomfortably, while Davis and Elise donned their uniforms, their movements stiff under scrutiny. Poirot directed the scene with precision, positioning each passenger in their original seat. "We begin at 11:45, he announced, his voice carrying authority. "Monsieur Davis, you serve the drinks. Mademoiselle Grandier, you fetch the mirror. Mesdames et messieurs, react as you did." Davis moved down the aisle, tray in hand, his hands trembling slightly. Elise, at Lady Horbury's request, crossed to the galley. Poirot, standing by seat to be, released a paper wasp tied to a string, mimicking its flight. Lady Horbury squealed on cue. Jane flinched. Gale swatted airily. Davis, chasing the paper insect, darted to the galley. Returning moments later, Poirot watched every gesture, every glance. The cabin's bustle was chaotic, yet darted, hands moved, but none lingered on Giselle's seat. He halted the reenactment at 11:55, his mind racing. The moment of death, he said, was cloaked in this chaos. The killer acted when all were distracted, the wasp, the mirror, the coffee run. He turned to Davis, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur, your absence in the galley, did you see anyone approach it before you?" Davis flushed, shaking his head. "No, sir. I was alone, I swear." Elise, standing nearby, added, "I was only gone a moment, Mr. Poirot. The galley was empty when I got the mirror." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Their stories held, but the timing was too perfect. The distractions, too orchestrated. He stepped into the galley, examining the counter's scratch again. A faint residue, missed earlier, caught his eye wax, perhaps from a sealed vial or syringe. He requested a sample for Dr. Carter, suspecting it tied to the curare. Back at Scotland Yard, Jap reviewed the steward's backgrounds. Davis's gambling debts, though small, suggested vulnerability. Giselle could have exploited him. Elise's record remained spotless, but her French origins raised a question. Had she known Giselle in Paris? Poirot requested a cable to French authorities, seeking any link. Meanwhile, Giselle's notebook offered new clues. An entry marked J.R. James Ryder. The clerk showed a debt of £300, recent and unpaid. Ryder's nervous demeanor during interviews took on new weight. A quiet man, Poirot mused, but quiet men have secrets. Jap, frustrated, pushed for arrests. Lady Horbury's lying about her debt. Gale's got the means. Davis is shifty, and now Ryder's in the mix. Let's haul them in. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm. "Nan, Inspector, the killer is one, not many. The timing, the distractions, the method, they point to a single mind, meticulous and bold. We must trace the wasp's vial, the syringe's path, the notebook's truth." His gaze drifted to the seating chart, lingering on the galley's proximity to seat 1B. Ryder's seat, near the vial's hiding place. As they parted for the night, Poirot's mind churned. The murder was a puzzle of precision, its pieces scattered across 10 fleeting minutes. The wasp, the mirror, the scratch, the violette, was a note in a deadly symphony, conducted by a hand still hidden. The killer, he knew, had gambled on chaos, but Poirot's order would prevail. He stepped into the rain, his small figure resolute, the truth a shadow he would soon bring to light. Chapter 8. The disguise revealed the conference room at Scotland Yard, with its long mahogany table and heavy drapes, was transformed into a theater of revelation. Hercule Poirot stood at one end, his small frame commanding the space, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had unraveled a knot. The passengers of the Prometheus, summoned under the pretext of a final interview, sat in a tense semicircle. Lady Cicely Horbury, her face pale beneath her rouge; Venetia Burnaby, her loyal shadow; Dr. Norman Gale, his charm tinged with unease; Jane Grey, her grey eyes wide with anticipation; the Duponts detached but curious; and the others Clancy Kerr and Ryder each, betraying a flicker of apprehension. Inspector Japp, leaning against the wall, watched with a mix of skepticism and expectation, his notebook open but untouched. Outside, a London fog curled against the windows, shrouding the morning in secrecy. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his voice clear and measured. "Madame et messieurs, we are gathered to solve a crime, most audacious, some murder in the sky, where Madame Giselle met her end by a poisoned dart. The killer believed themselves invisible, but to Hercule Poirot, no truth remains hidden." A murmur rippled through the room, Lady Horbury's cigarette trembling in her fingers, Gale's smile tightening. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "Let us begin with the facts." He gestured to a table where the evidence lay displayed: the Carrara-tipped dart, the crude blowpipe, the glass vial, and Madame Giselle's black notebook. "The dart," he said, holding it aloft, "delivered Carrara, a poison swift and silent. The blowpipe found behind seat 3A suggests a primitive act, but it is a lie, a distraction to mislead us. In a crowded cabin, such a tool would be seen. The true method was precise, modern, and concealed." His gaze swept the room, noting every reaction: Ryder's nervous fidgeting, Jane's attentive stillness, Gale's studied calm. Poirot paced, his steps deliberate. The crime occurred between 11:45 and 11:55 a.m., a window of chaos orchestrated by the killer. A wasp, released from a vial found under seat 1A, created a stir. Lady Horbury's squeal, Mademoiselle Grey's flinch, Monsieur Gale's swat. The steward, Albert Davis, left for the galley to fetch coffee. The stewardess, Elise Grandier, fetched a mirror for Lady Horbury. In those moments, the killer struck. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But how, and who could move freely, unnoticed, in a cabin of watchful eyes? Japp shifted, his impatience evident. "Get to it, Poirot. You've got suspects: Lady Horbury's debts, Gale's syringe, Davis's shifty behavior. Who's it going to be?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, mon ami. The truth requires method. Let us consider the galley a place of anonymity, where a steward moves without question." And yet, a curious detail emerged: a steward's uniform, reported missing after the flight. A gasp escaped Jane Grey, quickly stifled. Poirot's eyes flicked to her, then moved on. "This uniform," he continued, "allowed the killer to become invisible, to approach Madame Giselle under the guise of service. The dart was not blown but injected, likely by a syringe, mistaken for a wasp's sting in the chaos." He turned to the evidence table, lifting a photograph of the galley's counter, its faint scratch mark circled in red. "This mark, Mies. Amos, suggests a toolless syringe, perhaps prepared in haste." Lady Horbury's voice cut through, sharp and indignant. "This is nonsense. I was nowhere near the galley." "You can't possibly think." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Madame, your debt to Giselle was motive, but your actions were too conspicuous. The killer is one who blends, not one who shines. His gaze shifted to Dr. Gale, whose smile had faded. Monsieur Gale, your syringe is most intriguing. Curare, though rare, is known to those in medicine. And your seat, 3B, was close to Giselle. Gale leaned forward, his voice steady but strained. I was reading, Mr. Poirot. Jane saw Michi confirm it. Jane nodded, hesitant. He was reading, yes, but everyone was distracted by the wasp. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisement, mademoiselle. And in that distraction, the killer moved. He turned to the stewards, Albert Davis and Elise Grandier, standing stiffly by the door. Monsieur Davis, your absence in the galley at 11:52 was brief but critical. Mademoiselle Grandier, your errand for the mirror coincided perfectly, yet neither of you saw the act. Davis flushed, his hands twisting. I told you, sir, I was just getting coffee. Elise's eyes were steady, and I fetched the mirror, nothing more. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And yet, the missing uniform suggests another player, a passenger, who became a steward. He paused, his gaze settling on Dr. Gale. Monsieur Gale, I put it to you that you are the killer. During the wasp's chaos, you slipped into the galley, donned the missing uniform, and approached Madame Giselle. Disguised as a steward, you injected curare with a syringe, its puncture mistaken for a wasp's sting. The blowpipe planted behind seat 3A was your misdirection, meant to suggest a crude crime. Gale rose, his face pale but composed. That's absurd, Poirot. I was in my seat, Jane saw me. And where would I get curare? Poirot's voice was calm, relentless. The curare, monsieur, came from your locked cabinet in Harley Street, where a search ordered this morning found traces of it. Your debt to Giselle, £500, threatened your reputation. You planned this with care, using the wasp, released from a vial, to distract, and the uniform to vanish into the role of servant. The room was silent, all eyes on Gale. Jap, stunned, signaled a constable to approach. Gale's charm cracked, his voice rising. This is madness. You've no proof. Poirot held up a report from Dr. Carter. The wax residue on the galley counter matches that on your syringe, monsieur. The vial's sugar syrup traces were found on your handkerchief, used to lure the wasp. Your minute in the galley, disguised, was enough. Gale's shoulders slumped, his mask falling. She would have ruined me, he muttered. Her demands. I had no choice. Jap, snapping handcuffs on him, muttered, You've done it again, Poirot. The passengers exhaled, relief mingling with shock. Jane Grey's eyes met Poirot's, a silent thank you for her freedom. Lady Horbury, shaken, stubbed out her cigarette, her bravado gone. Poirot stepped back, his work complete. The killers, disguised so carefully crafted, had crumbled under the weight of his meticulous observation. The truth, as always, had yielded to his grey cells. Chapter 9. The Confession. The Scotland Yard. Interrogation room was a stark contrast to the opulent settings Hercule Poirot had visited earlier. Lady Horbury's Mayfair flat. Dr. Gale's polished Harley Street office, its bare walls, scuffed table, and single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows, amplifying the tension that hung like a storm cloud. Dr. Norman Gale sat across from Poirot and Inspector Jap, his once charming demeanor frayed, his dark eyes darting between the two men. His hands, cuffed, rested on the table, fingers twitching as if seeking escape. Poirot, impeccable in his pinstripe suit, sat with serene composure, his green eyes fixed on Gale, while Jap, his broad frame leaning forward, radiated barely contained triumph. All right, Gale, Jap began, his voice gruff. You've been caught red-handed. Curare in your cabinet, wax traces on your syringe, sugar syrup on your handkerchief. You planned this down to the last detail. Care to tell us how? You did it. Gale's lips tightened, his jaw working as if chewing on the words he withheld. Poirot tilted his head, his voice soft but piercing. Monsieur Gale, the game is over. Your disguise, your wasp, your syringe, they have spoken. Now, let us hear your voice. Gale's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. He ran. A hand through his hair, a gesture that once seemed effortless, but now betrayed defeat. You're right, Poirot, he said at last, his voice low, almost a whisper. I killed her, Madame Giselle. She had me in a vice, and I saw no other way out. Japp's pencil hovered over his notebook, ready to capture every word, while Poirot leaned back, his gray cells piecing together the final threads of the puzzle. Gale's confession unfolded like a carefully rehearsed script, though tinged with the bitterness of a man cornered. It started 6 months ago, he said, staring at the table. I'd overextended myself gambling, investments gone sour. I needed cash to keep my practice afloat, to maintain the facade of success. Giselle was recommended by a patient, a discreet lender for those in delicate situations. I borrowed £500, thinking I could repay it quickly, but her terms were brutal interest that doubled monthly, threats to expose me to my clients if I missed a payment. Poirot nodded, recalling the entry in Giselle's notebook, marked with £500, recent and unpaid. And so, monsieur, you feared ruin? Gale's laugh was hollow. Ruin, she'd have destroyed me. My practice, my reputation, everything I'd built. I'm a dentist, Poirot, not a lord with a title to fall back on. One whisper of scandal, and I'd be finished. Japp's eyes narrowed. So you decided to kill her? On an airliner, of all places. Bold, I'll give you that. Gale's gaze flicked up, a spark of defiance returning. It wasn't impulse. I planned it for weeks. Giselle traveled that route regularly, Paris to London, always on the Prometheus. I booked a seat, studied the cabin, the steward's routines. I knew I could move unnoticed if I created the right moment. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his keen interest. The wasp, monsieur, a clever touch. How did you arrange it? Gale's lips curved into a grim smile, a shadow of his former charm. A pet shop in Paris. A single wasp, kept in a glass vial with sugar syrup to keep it docile. I slipped it into my pocket, released it during the drink service. It was perfect. Everyone was distracted, swatting, squealing. Lady Horbury's fuss was a godsend, and the uniform, Poirot pressed, his voice like a scalpel. Gale nodded, his eyes distant. I'd noticed the steward's spare uniforms in the galley on a previous flight, easy to nick one during a layover. I kept it folded in my dental case small enough to hide. When Davis went to the galley for coffee, I slipped in after him, put on the jacket, and tucked my case under the counter. No one looks twice at a steward serving a drink. Japp's pencil scratched furiously. And the Curari, where'd you get that? Gale's expression darkened. A contact from my university days, a chemist who dealt in rare compounds. I told him it was for research. Cost me a fortune, but it was untraceable. I modified a syringe, loaded it with Curari, and kept it in my pocket. The blowpipe was a decoy, bought it from a curio shop, planted it behind seat 3A to throw you off. Poirot's eyes gleamed, the puzzle falling into place. And the act itself, monsieur. How did you deliver the poison? Gale leaned back, his voice steady now, as if relieved to unburden himself. It was quick. I approached Giselle as a steward, offering coffee. She was writing in that damned notebook, didn't even look up. I leaned in, as if adjusting her tray, and jabbed the syringe into her neck. The wasp's buzz covered any sound she flinched, but everyone thought it was a sting. I was back in my seat before Elise screamed. Japp shook his head, half disgusted. Cold as ice, aren't you? And you thought you'd get away with it? Gale's smile was bitter. I nearly did. The blowpipe, The wasp bit was all meant to confuse if you hadn't noticed the uniform, Poirot, or that scratch in the galley. He trailed off, meeting Poirot's gaze. How did you know? Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. The order, monsieur. Your plan was meticulous, but no plan is perfect. The missing uniform betrayed a disguise. The scratch in the galley spoke of your syringe. The vial's sugar syrup linked to your handkerchief. And your calm sèche, monsieur, too polished, too precise. The guilty, they often hide behind perfection. Gale's shoulders slumped further, the last of his defiance gone. Jap snapped his notebook shut, signaling a constable to take Gale away. You've done it again, Poirot, he said, a grudging respect in his tone. I was ready to pin it on Lady Horbury, or that shifty steward. Poirot's smile was modest. The truth, mon ami, is like a melody. It requires all notes to be heard. You played your part admirably. As Gale was let out, Poirot's thoughts turned to the passengers, now cleared of suspicion. Lady Horbury, her debts exposed, would face scandal, but not prison. Jane Grey, innocent and observant, had been a witness to chaos, her honesty a beacon. The DuPonts, Clancy, Kerr, and Ryder each had secrets, but none deadly. Poirot requested a moment alone, stepping to the window to watch the fog swirl outside. The confession had closed the case, but the why lingered greed, fear, the fragility of a man's pride. Gale's fall was a tragedy, but justice, Poirot knew, was order restored. He turned to Jap, who was already drafting his report. One last task, Inspector. Ensure Mademoiselle Grey is thanked. She saw more than she knew. Jap nodded, scribbling a note. Poirot adjusted his tie, his mind already turning to the next puzzle, though none, he suspected, would match the elegance of this sky-born crime. Chapter 10. The order restored the small tea-room near Scotland Yard, with its chintz, curtains, and polished silver teapots, offered a haven of civility after the grim intensity of the interrogation. Hercule Poirot sat at a corner table, his small hands cradling a cup of tisane, its steam curling like a whisper of the case now concluded. Across from him, Inspector Jap, his broad face softened by relief, stirred his tea with a clink of spoon against china. The fog outside had lifted, revealing a London afternoon bathed in pale sunlight, as if the city itself exhaled after the storm of Madame Giselle's murder. The Prometheus, once a stage for death, now sat silent at Croydon Aerodrome, its secrets laid bare by Poirot's meticulous mind. Jap leaned back, his eyes glinting with grudging admiration. You're a marvel, Poirot, he said, sipping his tea. I'd have bet my pension on Lady Horbury, or maybe that shifty steward, Davis. But Gale cool as a cucumber, and a killer to boot. How do you do it? Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. It is merely a matter of order, mon ami. The human heart is complex, but its actions leave patterns. The killer, he believed himself invisible, but to Poirot, the truth always reveals itself to those who look with clarity. He set down his cup, his thoughts drifting to the case's intricate tapestry. Dr. Norman Gale's confession had unraveled the crime, symphony of distraction orchestrated with chilling precision. The wasp, released from a sugar-laced vial, had sown chaos. The stolen steward's uniform had granted anonymity. The Ferrari-loaded syringe, disguised as a routine gesture, had delivered death. The blowpipe, a crude decoy, had nearly misled them. But Poirot's gray cells had seen through the ruse, tracing the threads of timing, opportunity, and motive to Gale's desperate bid to escape Giselle's financial stranglehold. Poirot's mind lingered on the passengers, now free but forever marked by the flight. Lady Cicely Horbury, her debts exposed, had retreated to her Mayfair flat. Vowing to curb her excesses a promise, Poirot doubted she would keep. Venetia Burnaby, her loyal shadow, would shield her still, though their bond carried a hint of unspoken strain. Jane Grey, the young hairdresser, had emerged unscathed, her honesty a beacon in the fog of suspicion. Poirot had learned, through Jap, that she and young Armand Dupont had struck up a tentative romance, their shared ordeal sparking a connection. He smiled at the thought love, even amidst murder, was a human constant. The Duponts' father and son had returned to their archaeological pursuits, their detachment genuine, their secrets confined to ancient ruins. Mr. Clancy, the writer, was already weaving the murder into his next novel, his eccentric notes a harmless outlet. Daniel Kerr, the businessman, and James Ryder, the clerk, had faded into their ordinary lives, their minor debts to Giselle a footnote in the case. Albert Davis and Elise Grandier, the stewards, resumed their duties, their brief suspicion lifted, though Davis's gambling habits would bear watching. Poirot sipped his tisane, reflecting on the crime's audacity. The Prometheus, a marvel of modern travel, had been a stage for an ancient, Singreed fear, the fragility of pride. Gale's plan, so nearly perfect, had crumbled under the weight of small details: the missing uniform, the galley's scratch, the vial's residue. The killer, Poirot said, almost to himself, relied on chaos, but chaos cannot withstand the order of the mind. Jap chuckled, setting down his cup. You make it sound simple, Poirot, but it's wizardry to me. That uniform business, how'd you twig it? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The stewards, mon ami, moved with purpose, yet one uniform vanished. Only a passenger, seeking invisibility, would take such a risk. Gale's syringe, his calm, his debt, they all pointed to a man who planned with care, but overlooked the power of observation. Jap shook his head, marveling. Well, you've saved us a mess. The press is eating it up. Dentist's deadly dart, they're calling it. Lady Horbury's name in the papers won't do her any favors, but she's clear. As for Jane Grey, she sent a note, thanking you, says she's dining with young Dupont tonight. Poirot's smile widened. Bon, a touch of happiness amidst the tragedy. It is as it should be. He rose, adjusting his tie with precise fingers. The case was closed, the puzzle solved, yet Poirot felt the familiar restlessness of a mind eager for the next challenge. He tidied his notes, now neatly filed, each detail a testament to his method. The truth, Inspector, he said, is like a star, it shines brightest when the night is darkest. We have restored the order, and that is enough. Jap stood, clapping Poirot on the shoulder. Until the next one, eh? Come on, let's get some air. They stepped into the London street, the city alive with its endless rhythm. Poirot's small figure moved with purpose, his mind already turning to the mysteries that awaited, confident that no shadow could hide from the light of his gray cells.